before you get to a venue, you can also do some homework, and believe it or not, Google Earth or Google Maps or plans or whatever it is really good. You can download a plan view of the venue and you can start working out what winds to expect. So, for example, if I've got a shoreline running like that from Google Plans, and I know I'm going to get a breeze running up this way that's parallel to the shore. Now I'm going to get complicated. I know for a fact that I'm going to get a compression lane of air right through here, which I want to sail with. I'll explain that in a second. If I got a breeze that was actually coming from the opposite direction, I would actually want to avoid this region because I get the exact opposite. I get a decompression lane. So I'll explain it in a second, but when I'm looking at a racetrack, I can do homework like that. I can check tides out and find out where the current flows. People talk about it all the time. If you don't know, ask locals. Where's the current flow? Where's it hardest? Where's it strongest? And if you're still in doubt, get a chart that shows where the deepest water is. Work out where the deepest water is going to flow there. It's not going to flow in the shallows, it's going to flow in the deep water. But if I've got a plan out, and I do this a lot, I'll print out Google Maps, Google Earth, and I'll start drawing diagrams of where I think the wind's going to be in certain wind directions that we might see in the regatta. And then when I turn up to the venue, I'll check to see if does a compression lane actually exist there where I thought it should exist. Is the land higher and is the wind going to bend around that point? So what I'm looking for is, and these are my descriptions of them, I'm looking at what does a gust look like, and I've got a few different types of gusts. I've got a block gust, I've got a fan-shaped gust, I've got a stationary gust, which is what that would be, and I've got what I call a stop and go. So I suppose we should talk about each of those, seeing we're trying to figure out what the breeze was doing. And if you think about why the gust form, it might help. Now my only problem is I personally don't know why a block gust exists. I haven't quite figured that one out in my head yet. So someone might be able to tell me why it exists. But a block gust is just the easy one, which is where you see a big sheet of wind and it's just moving towards you. You can spot it, you can see it's obvious, it's standing out. They can be different shaped rectangles. It's up to whatever you're seeing on the water. They're different sizes, and what you'll find is the breeze on the front edge will be a little bit stronger than the breeze behind it, but the breeze behind it will be consistent in whatever direction it is, and it's usually travelling at 90 degrees to its front edge. So for those of you that are trying to pick which way a gust is going, just look at the direction it's travelling and you can usually see it. My first type is a block gust. Get into it and then just work out which tack you need to be on once you're in it and just use it. So that one's pretty easy, I reckon. And they're the travelling ones. The second type, which is for those of you going to Canberra next year, you might want to know this because these ones appear off Black Mountain all the time. And what you'll see is a gust that has the shape of a fan. And you can't miss it. The front edge is curled and the two back edges pull away like a fan. And it's wind that's actually vertically unstable. So if I've got a big mountain range here like Black Mountain in Canberra, the wind is coming off the mountain and dropping, and as it hits the water it's exploding and fanning out. And that's a very different style of gust, so I'm going to approach that very differently. If I've got a fan gust, I want to try and hit this surface here or this surface here, because both of those are going to be a lift. This one's going to be a lift on that tack and this one's going to be a lift on that tack. The place I don't want to hit a fan gust is towards the centre, because I'm actually going to get a bit more pressure, but it's not going to assist me in any way. So now Adrian's sitting there nodding his head going, hang on, this is good stuff. So my second type of gust is a fan gust, and I hope that makes some sense. The third type of gust I see on the water, sorry for my very boring names for them, is a stationary gust. That's a gust that doesn't move. Okay? Now gusts that don't move, if I've got water, if I've got a piece of land here, there's a shoreline. So that's my shoreline. And out the front of it, I've got water. got to use your brain here for a second, everybody. Wind is going to travel across water easier than it's going to travel across land. That means the land is slowing the air down, it's causing drag. When I've got wind that's running fairly parallel to a shore that has been slowed down, the Coriolis effect in the southern hemisphere is going to cause that breeze to turn to the right. In the northern hemisphere it's going to turn to the left, in the southern hemisphere it's going to turn to the right. Now this is when breezes are fairly parallel to the shore, so Port Phillip Bay is a prime example of this because you'll get a breeze that runs parallel to the shore at most of those sailing clubs there, and there are days you want to smack that shore hard and there are days you want to get away from that shore. So what I was saying before is this: when I've got a breeze that's running fairly parallel, the wind on the shore has been caused to slow down and Coriolis has made it turn to the right. So we've got a little bit of a breeze hooking off the shore. We've still got our breeze that's flowing down the shore, so what we end up with is a region here of where these two breezes meet and actually give us extra pressure. And those gusts don't move. You can see them, and it's funny because they happen in Canberra too. People will sail straight up to it, they feel this pressure and they'll tack on it and sail straight back out of it. If you've got a stationary gust, as in this kind of situation, you need to go all the way almost across the stationary gust and then tack so that you can stay out for as long as possible. So you need to be, I've drawn that as if I'm going downwind, that was a bit stupid, but there you go. You need to pay attention to what I'm drawing. You need to recognise that there will be regions of more pressure that are stationary, and the exact opposite exists. There's my shoreline again. My water's still out here. Now this time, our wind is blowing the opposite direction on the shore, and I said that the breeze turns to the right. So out here we've got nice bits of breeze that are blowing straight, but as we get close to the shore, the last bit of breeze is going to turn to the right. And what you notice is, in this region here, that same sort of region that we a minute ago had a compression lane, in this region, the breeze is actually getting lighter, and it's time to avoid that shore. So these are the kind of tricky things that we're looking for, and you can actually do before an event, a little bit of homework on a piece of paper, and you can work out where they're going to be. Another place you can get a stationary gust that's worthwhile, and there's a place in Bayview that really reminds me of this, is around points. So there's a point in Bayview where the wind's blowing down here like this all the time. The wind hits this part of the point and bends out because it's quite a steep point and it's got nowhere to go, so it gets funneled, it gets forced out, and I get this great compression lane across the tip of the point. And then what happens is the breeze starts to wrap into the dead spot behind the point. So what you see a lot of sailors doing is recognising there's a compression lane there and there's also a lift here. So what they'll do is they'll aim, say, 50 metres or less behind the point. They'll aim to come in there so that they get a lift. The lift is now taking them into the compression lane, and then when they tack back out, they'll lift back up, but they'll lift back up to what was the normal breeze in a compression lane where there's more pressure. So you need to recognise what's a good point and what's a bad point. And if you notice here for a second that I'll get a slightly better lift off this one because the drag's actually going to cause it to curl quicker behind that point, whereas the opposite side point might get it to curl a little bit less. So it's important to recognise that you can get out a piece of paper as long as it's got a plan view of your area, and you can work out the heights of some of the shorelines. You can work out when it's going to funnel, when it's going to slow down, when it's going to compress. And you can pick spots on the course where you might have a hard look at going to. And you can actually understand why it's there before you even get to the venue, and then all you can do is check at the venue what it is. The last one's a hard one, it's a stop and go, and on an NS I find it hard. On yachts I'll definitely use them a lot more. And when I first started sailing at Concord Ride's full of stop and goes, and it's kind of interesting. Similar point to what we had before, except I'll draw it on the other side here for a second because I'm used to approaching it down this way. What we'll get is we'll get a great compression here on the front of the shore where the breeze is compressing and getting forced off, and the breeze will start to wrap around here, but we'll get a dead spot in the back here. And at Concord Ride, where they tend to lay the buoy, they lay the buoy up here. That forces you to have to go through the dead spot. But what you'll find is if you get out your stopwatch and you put a watch on it, you'll notice that the breeze will be here for a certain amount of time as it rolls over the hill, and then it'll go away for a certain amount of time, and then it'll be there for a certain amount of time, and then it'll go away for a certain amount of time. So if you're coming around this point at, say, a place like Concord Ride, there are times where you know you have to go really wide around there and then come back up to the mark. But there are days that you do that and someone behind you all of a sudden cuts the corner and gets in front of you. And you go, well, how the hell did they do that? Well, they did that because 1 minute there's breeze there, the next minute there's not, and that's called a stop and go. And believe it or not, you can usually set your watch to those. They're quite cyclical. And so if you know as you're approaching that hang on, we're coming to the end of the stop period, I could cut the corner closer than normal and take the risk. But that's what a stop and go is. So that's how I define my gusts. It's not a very complicated list, but it's just understanding why they form and how they form, and then using them to your advantage, knowing when to use them and when not to use them. So I've gone on a bit there about a first beat and what to look for. The problem is you've now got to take all that information and decide which is the best way to go. And to be honest, I'll just put my wind up there. To be honest, that's the most important one up there, pressure. The only time I wouldn't worry about pressure is if I've got a lot of current and I've got to hide from the current, or I want to be in the current. Then I'll worry about current. But the majority of the time, just worry about pressure. Stay in the pressure, go with the pressure, go with the pressure. If you do that, 9 times out of 10 you're going to be great at the top one. Now before I finish this section, there's one more I want, and it's a victorism. If you're really worried about the boats around you, the first thing you worry about is the fleet. Wherever the fleet goes, you go. Because if you separate for them, yes, you might make a big gain, but you also might make a massive loss. So the closer you stay to the fleet, the less change there's going to be. The second one that you worry about is the wind. So my list has just changed here. Worry about the fleet first and where they're going, then worry about the wind. And the last one is worry about the distance between you and the fleet. If you don't want to risk much, stay close to the fleet. If you want to risk a lot, separate from the fleet. We had a race yesterday that I thought I had to win outright, and I didn't worry about the third place boat, and all I wanted to do was get separation from Rob Fish, because the bigger separation, the more chance I had of passing him. Because at that point in time in the race, we're both going exactly the same speed, and they weren't making any mistakes in their tacks or jibes. We weren't making any mistakes in tacks or jibes, so the only way to pass him was to get some distance between us, and that way a tiny little lift or knock would allow one of us to separate. If it was earlier in the series, I wouldn't have separated from him. I'd stay right with him. If I'd known that Adam Corr's behind us, if he could get in between us, and it would have cost us a series. If I'd known that at the time, I wouldn't have done that. I would have just stayed with him and stayed in second place and been happy. But at the time, I thought I had to win outright, so I was doing the opposite of what I should do, and that was I was putting distance between us. Distance is sometimes bad, and sometimes you'll hear top sailors actually slowing down when their lead's too big to close the distance so that people can't sail around them. And there's an interesting one for people that are trying to stay in front of someone coming into a finish line. Sometimes it's worth slowing down to be able to be in a position where you can control the boat behind you. All right, that's that one.